You have a terrific background as a physician, an engineer, and astronaut. Tell us about it.
Well, I was really fortunate. I started out and I went to engineering school, then went to medical school. Was fortunate enough to, long story short, ended up at NASA as an astronaut and was able to fly, on the shuttle while I was there. And it was just, I followed things I was interested in, how things work and solving problems, and I've been fortunate to do that.
You've had an amazing career in studying safety in real time. Tell us about that.
Well, my safety work at NASA really went to a higher level when I was involved first with the accident investigation for Challenger back in '86, and then more recently in 2003 I also was the chief medical officer for the Columbia accident investigation. So both of those really tend to give you a better background in how to look at those things.
What were the lessons we learned from those two accidents?
Well, I think no matter how well you design any system, there's always going to be risk. And the big thing is what risks are avoidable and which aren't, and to really understand what those risks are up front so you can make intelligent decisions. And sometimes if you don't both communicate the risk, somebody knows, but everybody doesn't. The communications ends up to be one of the biggest pitfalls. That somebody knows there's a problem, but they don't communicate it to the person that needs to make the decision, and they get caught short and you end up with a tragedy.
Were there lessons from the NASA disasters that are directly applicable to healthcare?
Well, communication is still the #1 problem. We know whether it's in shuttle disasters, in both of those, obviously, communication was a problem that had it been better, we probably could have reduced the likelihood of those accidents. In healthcare, it's no different. We see that often information is available, but the practitioner might not have it at the right time, and the patient suffers the consequences.
What can trustees learn from aviation and what we can apply to hospitals? You made a great point about checks and balances.
Well, I think, it's one huge team is how you have to look at it. The trustees play a role, and their job is the kind of oversight and adult supervision for management. And if they don't know the right questions to ask, and it doesn't mean they have to be a medical expert, but, what are real causes? When somebody says, oh, it was human error is never a cause. It's what caused the human error, that's the cause. So if somebody comes back, oh, somebody made a mistake, how do you fix that? Tell people, be careful? Not very effective. So there's tools you can give the trustees so that they can, be a quality control, if you will, between, behind what goes on, and to really look at, is this really the right thing or not, and to ask the proper questions at the right time.
Trustees meet 2 to 4 times a year, 2 to 4 hours in a meeting. Is that really enough to provide oversight to a typical frontline hospital?
Well, I think quarterly meetings for the trustees, that can serve certainly a purpose. But I think some of the things, for instance, quality and safety activities, if you let them go by quarter, a lot of bad things can happen in a quarter. And I think most of the places that I'm familiar with that manage it well, they're much more involved. Some every 2 weeks, usually never less than a month, they're involved in what's going on to keep their finger on the pulse.
Is it reasonable to have a committee chair of a quality committee reporting to the board, and should they be clinical?
I don't think the committee chair has to be clinical. They certainly have to have a wide knowledge of what's being done clinically. Probably more important is a systems-based approach to what goes on, because that's the real problem solving, how to define the problem, how to solve it. Should they report directly to the board? I think it's a good idea they do, because then you don't have inadvertent filtering of the information. So you get the information firsthand and not inadvertently changed or deliberately changed.
So a board member who is a board chair of the quality committee is a reasonable player and might have to put a lot of extra time in to fulfill that role. Is that a fair statement?
I think I'd say it more strongly. I think might have to. I think they'd have to. If they didn't, then I think it becomes their chairman of quality committee in name only.
Are there particular areas that a board of directors, a board of trustees should focus on?
I think some of the things the board should look at is on investigations. They could say, have we had problems? Have they been legitimately looked at and investigated? And then have countermeasures been put in place that have been implemented and then shown to work or not work? And if not work, then what are we going to do to make them work?
You were on our original committee and have been on the committee of the National Quality Forum Safe Practices, and the safe practice for care of the caregiver has been a really successful practice in terms of providing great structure. However, adoption still is a challenge. Do you still think that care of the caregiver is an important focus area?
Well, I think it is. It's probably the most important is the care we provide to the patient, but that doesn't happen in a vacuum. So if the care provider is not cared for in some way, that's going to affect the product at the other end. So I think it would be short-sighted not to pay attention to the caregiver's needs as well.
Is that an area that the board of directors needs to focus on, since we still have such a rash of firings of nurses and pharmacists and other people that are involved in accidents?
I think in conditions like that where the staff has been, fired or things like that, the question is, was it a blameworthy act to begin with? And that should be something that's defined before the event ever occurs. What types of behavior or performance warrants dismissal or disciplinary action? There's really a small number of those that are associated with patient injury. Most of the patient injuries are associated with people trying to do the job the best they can, and they're more a victim of the overall processes that exist, not the fact that they're guilty of malfeasance.
We built the 4A's of innovation adoption: awareness, accountability, ability, and action into the structure of our leadership structures and systems, safe practice. Is that a reasonable framework to look at today?
Well, the 4A structure, I think, is a good one. It's a good framework in which to look at a problem, how to define it, how to decide what actions are necessary, and then make sure they're actually implemented so they actually help the patient.
We've talked about the invisible systems and the invisible risk that occurs with any event. You really knew what the risk was with the shuttle, didn't you?
Well, we thought we knew. At the time when I flew, we thought the risk was about 1 in 25 of a catastrophic failure on launch. And just recently, I'm on the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel for NASA. We went back and looked at this thing through probabilistic risk assessment, and we found out, in fact, it was more like 1 in 10 in the early flights. And it was only once we got past the 30th, 40th flight that we started getting around 1 in 30, and now we're at the end of the program in the 1 in 70, 1 in 90 range. So it took 30 years to get us down to that level, but it turned out we underestimated by a factor of 2 or 3 what the actual risks were. And it wasn't because we did it badly, it was just we had insufficient information. It was sort of the unknown unknowns, which are always a concern.
As we look at running hospitals today, do you think our risk is going up with the aging of patients and fragmented care and resource constraints, and should that be a concern to a board?
I don't think the risks are getting worse. In fact, I would say things have gotten better in the last 10 years. I think the fact that some of the numbers are worrisome is we have better reporting. It's not that it didn't occur before, it was the iceberg and we just saw the part sticking up above the water. I think things have improved. Have they improved enough? No. Are there many things we can do? Absolutely. Are there many shortfalls? Absolutely, but there's improvement. We just need to do better.
Testing is absolutely critical, and we know that there's a lot of improvement that we could do on the full loop of testing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the 5 rights are a good way to look at things. It goes from first selecting what test you need and then going through how do you order it, what background information do you do, the technique you actually use to do it correctly to make sure then the results are known. If you do all this work and then you don't even get results, then why did you even bother? It wasted time, it wasted resources, and at the end you take the appropriate action. So those things make sense. And to have that methodical way of looking at it is a way if we hew to that, we'll be much more likely to give patients the care they deserve and not waste and hurt people inadvertently.
Our cause is to convert waste to value and harm to healing simultaneously. Your thoughts?
I think it's absolutely right. You have limited resources. If you're wasting resources, that's bad. You want to make sure that you get the maximum bang for the buck, so to speak. And then you want to make sure you don't hurt patients inadvertently. That's the worst crime of all. Here we have individuals that their whole life is to help patients, and then to hurt one is the worst thing in the world. So, the better we set up systems that we don't waste resources and at the same time help people rather than inadvertently hurt them, that's the goal. And I think everybody wants that.
We're in a healthcare economic crisis. Do you think we can simultaneously reduce waste and reduce harm and reduce the impact of this crisis?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that that's true. The fact is, waste isn't a good thing. It's not a good thing from a financial standpoint. It's not a good thing for efficiency of caring for the patient. If you delay due to waste, you delay caring for a patient with a disease they have, that's not good for the patient. So that's safety, that's quality of care. These things are inextricably related. They're not divorced at all. They're all part of the same pie, the same piece of puzzles.
What's your message to today's trustee?
Well, I think trustees need to really be involved. They should be skeptical. Not that they don't trust people, but they should ask questions. They should understand what's going on. A lot of these things are common sense. Many of these people are in business. The same acumen they would use in their business to decide, is this a good investment? Are we operating effectively, efficiently? Apply equally as well as if you're running the corner hardware stores, if you do it from the hospital. It's not a mystery, but sometimes we behave as if it is. It's not. And I think common sense questions with a few little guides, they can do quite a good job.
CEOs, the chief professional administrative officer of our hospitals, carry a huge burden on their shoulders. What's your message to them?
Well, leadership is the one that sets the tone. They lead by both what they say, but more importantly, what they do. If you're a leader, it means people follow you. Not that you push them. You don't have to look around to see if they're buying the R's. That means you have to lead by example. If you say quality is important, then it's important. It's probably the first thing you take up at your board meetings. Not when, if we have time at the end, after we talk about financials, then we'll talk about quality and safety. We talk about it first. So I think those kind of things speak volumes, and you do it by what you say, by what you do, not by just what you say.
CFOs and chief operating officers are able to green light or red light projects and investments in patient safety. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's certainly true, but it's a matter of education. You have to be looking at this as an investment. When I was at the VA, we always showed what the business case was for any improvement or change we wanted to make, which I think was a responsible thing to do. Once we got the confidence of the CFOs, they said, we can't afford not to make this investment. It'd be foolish not to do so. And I think that's just a way you have to talk about it. We can't talk about it as cost. It's an investment to make things better, and you do better by delivering good quality, not by cheaping out on it.
What's your message to benefactors in a community that might not be related to a hospital? And as we face this healthcare economic crisis, our hospitals are very vulnerable and making patients vulnerable. What's your message to potential donors in safety and quality?
Well, I think for donors, they're donating because they want to see an improvement of the end state, right? They want to see patients get good care, safe care, high quality care. And just as they would make investments in a business or in their own businesses, they want to make sure that their investment's going to yield that result. So I think they need to ask the right questions. They need to pull back the curtains and say, what is our quality like? How do we measure this? How do we improve things? Do we improve things ever? Do we even think about it? And then they can use that to guide what kind of investment they should make and how that should be done.
We like to say that we could still look to the skies for help in patient safety and that checklists are just the beginning. What are your thoughts on what the crossover opportunity of best practices and leadership and technology concepts are for us in healthcare from aviation?
I think absolutely. I mean, it's not that aviation, they're smarter than healthcare. In fact, it's probably the opposite. But the fact is they've learned by the sweat and blood over the last half a century or more about how they weren't doing as well as they could, how they understood teamwork, communication was important, systems, use of checklists, cognitive aids, and those things that they learned the hard way over 40, 50, 60 years. We can take all that knowledge and not start from scratch, build on what they've done. And we've started to do that, and I think we just need to do it more and do it in a more widespread way, not just in a few leading organizations, but everywhere.
What are your thoughts about an NTSB for healthcare?
Well, an NTSB, or a central organization that can actually investigate problems, to take a very good systems-based approach that takes expertise not just of medically smart or knowledgeable technicians, but engineers and others, because these are multifactorial problems that can then really apply those efforts to a problem and really come up with true solutions that are generalizable. And those are usually beyond the abilities and expertise and resources of any single small institution.
So even in this time of constrained resources, this is a good investment?
Oh, I think absolutely. If you look at the billions and billions of dollars that are spent a year on healthcare, and as you say, the percentage of waste and harm that inadvertently comes out of that, for a very modest investment, I mean, we're talking tenths of a percent of that, I think you can make substantial impacts, which has already been shown in some institutions. And I think this would be, if we don't do it, it's being penny wise and pound foolish.
You're uniquely equipped to understand how applicable the aviation, NTSB, NASA tools might be to apply to healthcare. Are they?
Oh, I think they're absolutely applicable. The same things that we've learned from aviation, nuclear power, engineering, investigations in general are absolutely applicable to healthcare, whether it's clinical problems or infrastructure problems. These same basic problem-solving techniques are absolutely useful.
As we look at the shelf life of practices and measures, they're all a little bit different, and there are new studies that come out. Is it reasonable to say that we should be pretty aggressive about carefully reviewing the literature to keep them fresh and keep them proper and appropriate?
I think absolutely, because as we go on, we learn new things all the day. So if we don't constantly refresh and say, here's what we thought we knew yesterday, is it true today? So certainly on a regimented, periodic basis, not just when we happen to think about it, we should go back and review, is this the right diagnostic technique for this particular disease? Is this the right treatment modality? We should do that all the time to make sure we don't have these 17, 18-year hiatuses between knowledge becoming available and it ever being used. That's really disgraceful, and that does happen today.
What's your message to consumers about the risk in healthcare? As somebody that managed risk, that's looked at accidents and is cross-trained in engineering and aviation and healthcare, what's your advice to consumers?
Well, I think we're certainly much better off for healthcare the way it is, then we didn't have it at all. There's no question. Can we do better? Yes, but I think consumers have to use their head. There are various databases they can look at, various organizations that can supply information so they can be an intelligent consumer. Just as if you would go to buy a car or a TV, you look into it and say, what is the best one for me based on my needs? Healthcare is no different, and you shouldn't just blindly go in and say, whatever you think, doc, tell me what to do. That would sort of be foolish. You have to educate yourself and take some responsibility yourself.
What's your advice to consumers about CT scanning?
Well, I think if you go to have an imaging of any type, CT or whatever, you should ask certain questions. You should go in and write them down so you don't forget, because you get flustered and don't do it. Go in and say, why am I having this? Are there other imaging techniques that would be alternatives, and what are the pros and cons of that? And if nothing else, sometimes you could say that if you're talking to the radiologist, well, if this were your mother or your father or your child, what would you do for them and why?
So it's reasonable for them to have a checklist like the one that we're developing to help them go through the 5 rights?
I don't think it's reasonable. I think it's essential. I know my own parents, I'll talk to my mother and say, Mom, write these things down. Well, I'll remember. I said, no, write them down, because you'll get there and then you can look back and say, before you leave the room, say, oh, wait a minute, I have another question. I wish I was always successful in getting her to do it, but I think it's the thing to do.
Jim, what is your message to patient safety officers and those that are out at the front lines battling away in the war on healthcare harm?
Well, I think the patient safety officers, the people at the front line, are critical individuals. They're the ones that have the view of what's going on. It's a tough job. It's not for the faint of heart. When you're telling people about things that need to be improved, a lot of people don't want to hear what you have to say, but you're doing the right thing. And you need to keep in your mind, who are the patients you're helping today and in the future? And if you stay silent, they won't be. And that would be even a worse thing, to be a burden on your mind. Do the right thing. You'll never look back. You'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and know you did the right thing.
What's your take on having speakers who might be patients or families that have had problems to come in and speak at hospitals?
Oh, I think it's very powerful. I mean, we've used them many times, and I think especially working with boards, which I often do, the boards see that and it puts a face on it. It's not just a dry set of statistics on a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint slide. When people are telling their story, we relate as human beings, and we see human beings that are like you and me and have had problems. It's hard to be blasé about what needs to be done. People really understand we need to do something. Let's get on with it.
What's your message to somebody that's not been a public speaker but would really love to get involved in their hospital or get involved in some way and come and tell their story?
Well, I think people want to, they don't hear the stories enough, and I think everybody's nervous. Many people are nervous when they speak, but you're talking about a story that nobody knows better than you. It's not like you have to study. You lived it. You studied your whole life for it. You just need to think you're just having a conversation like you would talk to a neighbor or a family member, and do it like that. And you'll find that they're very well received. Any place I've been that's used families or next of kin or whatever in these situations, everybody feels a little awkward, but it works out well. I've never seen one that hasn't, and everybody benefits.
What's your message to a hospital team that's afraid of bringing in a patient?
Well, I can certainly understand the trepidation to having a patient come in, but the fact is you can't fix a problem if you don't know it exists, and you can't hide from it. The fact is it's there. Reality doesn't get better tomorrow. It's still there, and the best thing is to face it head on, deal with the problem and fix it. Your patients, and even patients that have been hurt, mostly what they want to see is that you acknowledge that a problem occurred and that you're willing to fix it, not that you act like, oh, that's just an expected complication. That no, this happened, what can we do to make it better tomorrow or make it less likely? Maybe not eliminate it, but make it less likely. That's honest, and people understand that. And I think we all feel better on both sides of the table if we act in an honest, straightforward way.
Jim, do you think that we really can throw the levers in our workforce to give them the love that they deserve, that we believe that they deserve, to have an impact on creating a real house of healing?
Well, I don't just think we can, I think we have to do that. And I can tell you at the VA, we targeted that. I targeted that the way we set up our root cause system. Wasn't just getting answers, it's who got them. So we had people from all walks of the hospital, not just clinical. We had people from housekeeping, we had people from the billing office that would look at problems, so they would bring their own knowledge there, which would be very beneficial, which was a surprise to some people. Had great answers, and then when you'd walk through the hospital, people would stop you and say, oh, let me show you what we fixed over here. They owned it. It wasn't that the hospital fixed it. The hospital is the people. The medical center is the people, and they owned it, and that's what you want. When they own it, they take care of it. If they just figure, I just show up for my 8 hours and go home, you're never going to be really successful. We got them where they really believed they made a difference, and not just believed, it was true.
The concept of, what if somebody had a mission statement of a hospital, loved ones caring for loved ones?
I think it makes perfect sense, because what you want to have is the people that work there look at this as a task, almost like they're calling. They have investment. They know it's not just them, they're working with the other people they work with. That we're working together towards a shared goal to take care of the patients. They look at the patients as human beings, not as diagnoses, not as the ulcer, not as the breast cancer patient that's Mrs. Jones or that's Mr. Smith, and they're people. And when they do that, people react in that way, and they treat them in a more humane thing, and they think more like the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we've shown that that works. I mean, in our own facilities, when you had that, morale was good. People were proud of what they did. They were dying to show you changes that they made that made it better. They didn't walk around saying, well, they won't let us do this. They know that they're the they. This organization is us. We're the they. It's not somebody else. It's not somebody in the third floor that we don't know at the end of the hall. It's us, and we talk to each other. And I think it takes everybody up and down the line to look at it that way. It takes management to lead and show that they respect everybody, and to give the authority and ability for people that are maybe not at the C-suite to make decisions and trust them. Occasionally it might not work out just right. Everybody makes mistakes. If you are so restrictive that you don't let people make mistakes, then they just kind of shut down and say, okay, well, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. You don't get the best out of an organization if you wait for everybody to be given an order what to do.
My dad, as a rocket scientist with NASA, would reflect, and other older NASA guys would reflect on the concept that even if you ask the guy who was sweeping the floor, what do you do here? And he said, we're putting a man on the moon.
Well, and that's exactly right. And that's how it should be. When there's a real good sense of purpose, everybody understands how they help things work. And I can tell you, when I came back from my first shuttle flight and you're talking to the crowd, and I remember watching football games where they interview the quarterback and they say, well, it was everybody else, and you think how disingenuous it is. Let me tell you, that's how you feel. I know that if it wasn't those thousands of people that did their job just right, I would be dead right then. And you understand, we all work together. And if everybody that does every little thing doesn't do it right, we're not going to succeed. We succeed only together, not individually.
And you knew on your shuttle flights that it was a 1 in 25 or 1 in 30 chance
or something like that.
of a fatal catastrophe.
Yeah.
And you got to trust.
You got to trust the people. I mean, you realize you're trusting with your life. I mean, it's a very serious thing. I mean, when you go and do it, and I mean, you trust those people. You know they do a good job, and they take it seriously, and they do. But you have to give people that respect. That you value what they do. I think another way to look at it for managers, I would say, sometimes people want to micromanage. You think I can do it better. Well, you have 20 people working for you. I don't care if you're 15 times as smart. You can't do as much as 20 people can do. You have to trust people. People want to do good work generally. If they're appreciated, if you let them do it, people don't try to screw up. They want to be appreciated. They want to know they made a difference. They don't want to feel like a pawn, like a widget, like a cog in the machine. They want to feel like they're part of a group working towards a common goal. And I think, how do we make people feel that? That's a challenge. It can be done. It must be done.
You've got a great story on root cause analysis.
Well, it just shows you how it's not just people that are clinical specialists can figure out a problem. What happened in this particular case was one of the first RCAs root cause analysis we ever did in the VA. And we said it should be multidisciplinary, not just clinicians, other people. In this case, it was a second floor window. A patient had fallen out of the window. Now, fortunately, there were shrubs below and the patient wasn't injured severely. But anyway, they put this together and they were having a nurse and head of housekeeping talk about what they should do. Meanwhile, they also said, let's have an architect involved. There had never been an architect in a root cause analysis in the VA to this time. So the architect wasn't resident there, had to drive from 40 miles away. Meanwhile, the nurse and the housekeeper were talking, and they said, well, obviously the reason the patient fell out the window was the window wasn't locked. So the nursing supervisor is writing a policy that'll say that this charge nurse must always double check that the window is locked before the patient can be put in the room. Meanwhile, the housekeeper is changing the policy such that only the shift supervisor can have the key to unlock the windows, so they have to be requested to unlock the windows. They will log it, do it, and then they will log that they've closed it. So they figure that's all that needs to be done. Meanwhile, they're just about done. The architect walks in and they say, well, we don't need you, we've already finished it. And he says, well, I drove all the way across here, can I just see what's going on? And they said, well, a guy fell out the window wasn't locked, et cetera. And he says, well, the patient's alive? And I said, well, yeah. He says, let's go talk to the patient, can I? He says, well, okay. And they were really kind of irked that he asked that. They go to the patient's room. He was in a different room now. And he explains what was going on. And he says, yeah, my son was here to visit me. He was leaving. And I just wanted to tap on the windows and wave goodbye as I saw him walk out the front. So he says, I get up against the window and I'm leaning against it. And he says, the next thing you know, I'm in the shrub. And that's all he remembered. So the architect goes, okay. So they leave him and they go to the actual room where the incident occurred. He gets up to the window, grabs the windowsill with one hand, And then he leans his head against the window, and as he does, the lock springs open and the window swings open. And the architect goes, well, here's the problem. This is the wrong architectural detail, specification. These locks, they're not made to take pressure like that. They'll spring open. They're just made to keep the wind from blowing the window open. So here, if they had not been there, they would have written these policies, and then the next time a patient fell out of the window, the conclusion would have been either the shift supervisor didn't verify the window was locked, or the housekeeping supervisor didn't lock the window, when in fact, it's the lock. So by having somebody that didn't have clinical knowledge, had a different type of knowledge, asked the right question, and we actually solved the problem because we had, I think as I recall correctly, 17 other facilities with the same locks that needed to be replaced.
So in effect, they did a substitution test.
You could look at it that way, yeah.
Is that, I mean, that's really what they did. They repeated the event.
Right, well, and that's the thing, simulation, it's good to do to simulate, As I said, he grabbed the windowsill, so at least he didn't totally duplicate the entire event. But, we show people when you have these other people on board, and we basically recommend on every team, which would be 5 to 6 people, there should be one person that is not clinical, fresh eyes, so they're looking at this differently. It makes a huge difference. And in the beginning, it was kind of, I won't say rejected, but resisted. After some of these things happen, people go, we want these other people. They bring other knowledge, different ways of looking at things to the table. So we look at it through a different lens and see other opportunities that were invisible to us before.
So when we look at accidents and we look at them through a different lens, there are some surprises.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see things you never expected, but until you look, and in fact, it's more than just looking at a report. It's often good if you can go to the actual work site, the place where it happened, because there's little things that are nuanced that the people that work there take for granted every day. And you as the investigator, you look there and go, what's with that? And it'll cause you to ask questions that would be transparent to you if you just read a report.
We're undertaking a program called LEAD, Leadership, Engagement, and Development. Do you believe that it's possible that we can really train our own people to become the trainers rather than to go outside the system, that they really can be their own professors and to teach?
I think, you give people the tools, I think absolutely, and I think can be most effective. I mean, everybody isn't capable of doing that, but I think with a little bit of work, you can pick, most of the people can do it given the right tools, and I think you certainly can get there. I don't think there's any question, because ultimately, you don't want somebody outside doing it for you. You want to have, resident in your own expertise, your own DNA of your organization, that's the way we do it, not that we have to hire a consultant to do it for us.
Most people are surprised to find out that Top Gun has no award and that they really didn't pick the hottest fighter pilot. They picked the guys who were teachers, who would be the best teacher, who happened to be a good throttle and stick guy, and they picked the best teachers, and really the competition was about to become a better teacher, but there was no trophy. In fact, the trophy was for the last guy.
That's exactly right. It was to get the best teachers, and people had, not that they weren't good pilots, but you wanted the person that was the best teacher, because if they could not impart that to others, then what's the point?